Welcome to All In with Allie podcast. I am so happy you are here. And I'm so excited to bring a very special guest again to the podcast. Miss Jessica Hayes is joining us, and we are going to have a conversation today that is not typical of what I would normally bring to this podcast, or I haven't yet. But as things tend to go, it's perfect timing for me. I have so many questions for you related to homeschooling and just schooling in general and parenting and all the things. And I know a lot of listeners are moms or plan to be mothers. And if not, then you're going to get something from this too, because Jessica is a teacher, she's a mom, and she's a business owner as well. So Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I am so happy to have you here. So to kick us off, why don't you tell us about you? How did you get here? And it doesn't have to just be business related. Just talk to me about like you and how you ended up a teacher and what you're doing now and your mission on this planet when it comes to just being you, who you are.
Sure. So, like most people, I grew up going to traditional public school. It was the school district. That's where you went. There wasn't really a lot of thought about it. And then I went on and got married and had children. And when my oldest daughter was about 3, I got mad at her preschool. And I did what a lot of people do. I'm going to find something better. And we did. So my ex-husband said, why don't we try the Montessori school? We knew nothing about it. We went and toured and loved it. But my thought process was that when she went into kindergarten, we would still move her to public school. But when kindergarten came around, I had a child that loved her friends, loved her school, loved her teachers. And I did too. And she ended up being there through 9th grade. At one point, I read a book called Lynchpin by Seth Godin. It's a business book, but he talks a lot about how to be the linchpin in an organization, how to be the person that doesn't just show up every day doing the list of things that you're told to do. And I really started thinking about how that applied to education as well, how in a lot of traditional schools, we teach children, you do the things that you're told to do throughout the day. And then I looked at what my children were doing in their school, and I just really became very passionate about the problems with our education system and the ways that we can make it better. So fast forward a couple of years, the job came open at the school to run it. And I didn't have a background in education, but I had a background in running nonprofits, which the school is. And so I jumped all in. So anyway, here I am 9 years later. I've been running the school. I love it. I love the children. I love the families. But now I'm ready for the next challenge in my life. And so what I'm working to do is take what I know about education and parenting and all of the things that I've been doing the last few years and working with parents and people who want to be or are school leaders to think about things in a different way other than just the rote methods that a lot of us know.
Okay. And how do you currently help teachers and parents? How do you prefer to do this now?
So you mean outside of my school?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've only been working on this for the last few months. I've known for a while it was time for something new. And I did a program last fall with Shauna Van Bogart, her Mind Over Matter program. And it really got me thinking a lot about what I know and what I know how to do. And it really opened me up to this idea that I could take all of these things that I've been doing and do it as a business, but also do it as a mission to help families. And so for the last few months, I've been working on setting up my website, creating some programs, and really just kind of getting started going down that path.
Amazing. So you have 2 kids?
I have 2 girls. One is almost 18 and the other one is 12.
Okay. Do you mind sharing what happened that moment, back with your daughter when you were like, okay, something has to change? Is that something you've ever shared before?
Well, I think for me, what I saw when I saw what my children were doing in school, the freedom that they had and the things that they were learning, and the ability that they have to pursue the things that they're passionate about in school. And then I looked at what public school is doing, and not just public school, but really just that traditional model where everybody goes to math class together, everybody goes to science. I tell people all the time, in our school, we're working towards mastery. So if a child doesn't understand something, they're going to keep working on it until they understand it. But if they do understand it faster than other children, then they keep moving, because it's about mastery. It's about making sure you understand those concepts. Whereas in a traditional school, you have math class and everyone has the same lesson, and then everyone has the same amount of time, and then you take a test. And whether you make a 33 or you make 103, everybody's moving on. And so when I look at the different ways of learning, that's when I really just, started thinking to myself, there has to be, well, there is a better way for children to learn. But, back to my own daughters, my oldest was in Montessori until she was through ninth grade. And she decided to go to another small private school. It's a traditional school, because she wanted a small environment. And that first parent-teacher conference that I had with one of her teachers who's been teaching for like 25 years, she just went on and on about the skills that Julia brought to the classroom: a love of learning, inquisitiveness, asking questions, doing her work because she needed to do her work. All of those things that typically aren't taught, she just does them naturally because that's what she learned. And I said to her teacher, I said, well, this is great feedback. Julia's a great girl and she's very smart. But all of those things that you're telling me about her are things that she learned being in a Montessori school for 15 years. So for me, like, that's where my passion about this really comes in, because children are made to do amazing things. And I think oftentimes our education system doesn't let them, because it's easier to design it for the adults in the room versus the children in the room.
Huge, huge. Okay. So your Instagram handle is Modern School Marm, which I had to look up Marm. I did not know what Marm meant. And for anybody interested, it is female school teacher. The more you know.
It's also descriptive of like an unmarried school teacher who's more like a marm than a lady.
Oh, got like a Mrs. type vibe.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Again, more you know.
Or an old maid type vibe, which I think
whatever. Is no, not old maid at all. You're fabulous. When you guys see,
I know. I just think it's a great pun.
I do too. Yeah, I think it's great. But when y'all see the video, Jessica's just so fabulous. She's got these bright red glasses on and bright pink hair. And we were talking about before we were recording, I was like, I could never, but maybe I could. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe not. I'm leaning into color, but I digress. So when you consider modern, when you obviously, through the experience of Montessori for your girls, but also you as an educator, is that what you consider modern, the Montessori system? Or now with your years of experience, you have your own take on what modern means?
It's really the latter, because Montessori itself, the system of education, has been around since 1907.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been around, for a long time. And, but it's also very modern because it matches so much of what science says that children need in the classroom. But I am a very unique person in the way that I have parented my children, the way that I still parent them. Just a lot of the ideas that I have about what education is or education could be. Like, for instance, one of our big beliefs at school, and I believe this wholeheartedly, is you learn as much or more outside of a classroom as you learn inside the classroom. So when we have families that go on trips during the school year, or we have a lot of international families, or they go back to see their family in Pakistan or Syria or wherever they're going, we always encourage them to come back and share the things that they've learned with their friends, because it is very much a learning experience. And so when I think about myself, I think I have a lot of takes on those things, like I said, parenting, education, school, that is more modern than what a lot of people have. But at the same time, it's not typical of what a lot of people believe either.
Okay. So it's something that, because yeah, we've been under it for the most part, this very traditional system, unless you go to Montessori, unless you go to private, unless you've been homeschooled. I would say probably most people have gone to their traditional public school. So I think, because I was doing some research, and I've been doing some research because we are very seriously considering homeschooling Cruz and possibly Rhett, if that goes well when Rhett gets a little bit older. So I've been doing some research on this too. And yeah, it's a little nerve wracking, right? When you're in it, and this is just like anything in any situation where you've been used to one thing most, if not your whole entire life, and then switching it up drastically. It's like, oh gosh, am I going to screw up my kids? Are they going to miss out on opportunities? So when you say that, like, it's not for most or not for all, it's just simply because some people prefer that more traditional approach, like we're mostly used to.
I think so, because it's hard sometimes to wrap your head around something that's so different. Like when I tour families, I tell them a lot, you have to trust what is happening in this building because you're not going to understand it. When Julia was little and she would come home and she would say something like, oh, she'd be so excited. Today I got a lesson on golden beads. I would say, what are the golden beads? And she'd go, oh, they're the golden beads, Mom. Well, that was actually place value, addition, subtraction, using gold beads. But there's all this terminology that, that you're not going to necessarily always understand. And so it's hard a lot of times for people to find comfort in just trusting a process that they've never experienced. And that's totally normal, and it's completely understandable.
Yeah. How would you, let's talk about that. So for anybody who is a newer mom like myself, and their kids are, younger or about to go into school, I'll just ask from my perspective, because I've been weighing pros and cons of homeschooling. And Jessica, from the beginning, she's told me she's not homeschooled, but she's worked with kids who have been homeschooled. So you bring this super unique perspective because you've worked with these kids who have been homeschooled for a specific, a certain amount of time. The pros for me and Chris and our family is, we get to create our own schedule. We both work from home. We can travel. The kids aren't sitting in a classroom for 8+ hours a day. Like you brought up, they can learn from like experience and culture, just memorization, not to mention anything else outside of that, like safety issues or anything outdated there. But my thought, again, it goes back to like, gosh, am I depriving him of that experience that so many of us have had that can actually be, I mean, even if it is super traditional and even maybe a little outdated in some way, you get shaped, right? These things, like life isn't supposed to be all fun all the time. Like these are good things that builds character, right? So what has been your experience getting kids that have been homeschooled for a certain period of time? What would be your advice and thoughts there?
Well, homeschooling is interesting because 15 or 20 years ago, it was a lot of families who had very specific religious beliefs that they wanted to incorporate as part of their children's education. And today, homeschool has become something that's so much more common, and there's such a wide variety of families that are doing it. I know where I am, there's a huge co-op where families, like children, go like 2 days a week and have classes with other children. And then the other 3 days of the week, they're with their family. There are homeschool athletic leagues. Like it's really become a very mainstream form of education. And I think that my advice to families is always that you really have to think about what you want for your child and your child's education. But typically, what I find when I get children or we get children at school who've been homeschooled is that they have a lot of the same habits and practices that our students have. They're used to getting their work done fairly quickly. Like we do most of our work in a 3-hour period in the morning. And most homeschool children are used to that because they sit down in the morning and they do their work and then they're done for the day. And so I think there's a lot of benefits to it. I think some parents struggle with it because their children don't respond well if they're the teacher, the parents or their teacher. Julia has a friend who her older brother was homeschooled all the way through high school. When she got to kindergarten, their mom was like, this child cannot be homeschooled by me. And so she sent her to our school. So I think it's always a dynamic between the parent and the child as far as how well that works. I think people also, society in general, gets hung up a lot on this idea of socialization. A lot of times they'll ask about our classroom size and how or why don't children need to be around more kids? Like we might have 20 children in a classroom and that's 3 grades. And people worry that their children aren't being, it's a term which doesn't really mean anything, but socialized enough.
Like a dog.
And I mean, yeah, well, exactly, right? But think of all the things that you do as a person where you're social and your children are around other people. It's not like, they're in a bunker all the time, except for when they come out to go to school. And so I always tell them there's a lot of benefit to being in a smaller group of children because when you're with a class of 200 and you and your friend have a fight, what do most kids do? They say, well, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. And they go make another friend and they never talk. So they never learn how to work out their issues. Whereas when they're in a small group and you're forced to be with these people every day, you learn how to get through your struggles and your fights and whatever else, because you don't really have a choice. So I think that it's obviously a personal decision, but I think there's pros and cons both ways. If you're going to do sport, if your child is going to do sports, if your child is going to do swimming, piano, any of those things, they're going to have a ton of opportunities to be with other children. I did put, and I'll put a little plug in here. One of the things I've gotten created and up on my website is actually a guide that I made for parents. It's about 3 pages, but it's questions that you can go through and you can ask yourself and really give thought to who do you want your child to be as a person and what do you want their education to teach them? If I wanted my child to be guaranteed a shot at getting into an Ivy League college, then my education plan for them is going to look a lot different than if I want them to, I don't know, grow up and be a free spirit or whatever. And so there's a lot in there that really just kind of drills down into what are your hopes and dreams for your child and what are your hopes and dreams for what they learn in school.
I love that because it's that big picture approach. Just like we talk about when we're planning out our businesses and we're thinking about the different things that we create there when it comes to our kids. And you heard me as soon as I opened up the homeschool conversation, I'm thinking selfishly, like, I want to be able to travel. I don't want to be upheld to these rigid standards, and of course, like there are things for him in there too, but I love that approach. It's like, no, what values do you have that you would hope pass on to your child? And, what matters? Like, if you want your child to go to Harvard, then you're probably not going to take maybe this route that I would take when that's not necessarily one of our biggest goals or values as far as our home is concerned. So that's a list that you have available right now because we could link it.
It's in my my link in my Instagram bio.
Okay, cool. I'll get that from you. Yeah, if you could send that to me or just send me the link, we'll link that in the show notes because I'm going to do that because that's something that Yeah, that's so smart because I'm overwhelmed. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm very, very overwhelmed. And by the way, I will not be teaching my child if we do homeschool. I already know. I just already know. I'm going to best case scenario, we actually have an incredible nanny who used to be a teacher before she came to us. So we're like working on her a little bit.
Oh, see,
But
that's perfect.
yes. Oh, she's incredible. But also, I'm still nervous, because I'm just like, but you're absolutely right. There's so many options now for all kinds of, different types of schooling and programs and co ops. And I think it's just deciding. I love, love, love this list idea. Getting clear. Okay, in a dream world, how do you want your child to grow up? How do you want them to come out the other side of this? And here are some avenues that make sense. That's going to get he or she from point A to hopefully that point or something better.
I want to say though, I think that when you say things like you want to be able to travel and things like that, to me, that's not selfish at all because that's part of your family and your family values. And, I live in a state where when I was in college, I worked at Walmart, and there was someone I worked with that had never been like 3 hours past the town that we were in. Like, I live in a state where there are a lot of people that have never left the state. They've never been on a plane. And one of the things, that was really important to my ex-husband and I when we had our children was that we gave them these experiences to see the world. And it's something that we've continued separately, but, even after being divorced, because being able to get out and experience and see things is really important, I think, for your life. So if that's a value that's really important to you and you decide to base your child's education around, not that you would do this, just that one specific thing, I think that's a totally valid reason for doing it.
Say less. Booking my trip immediately.
Exactly. I mean, I'm taking my girls to Greece in June, and it's like we've built in, seeing all these mythological sites because, we're going to be in Greece. But let's learn while we're there. It's important, I think, when you're raising your children. So book all the trips.
What are some of the places that you've taken your girls over the years?
So we like to go to Vermont. We go there. We've been there several times. We've been to Hawaii. We've been, oh my gosh, Florida, of course, multiple times. When Julia was in 8th and 9th grade, part of her school curriculum was doing this program called Montessori Model UN. Model UN is pretty common. It's where students are assigned a country and then they're a delegate for that country, and they go and they have a mock UN, and then in a traditional program, it's a competition. In Montessori, it's not. So she went to New York City twice with her class to go and represent these countries. And I don't know, we go places. We of course travel a ton for dance and sports, but I don't know if there's just a way we can go and spend time together. That's what your children remember when they're grown.
I agree.
They don't look back and think, oh, when I was 14, my mom gave me a pair of Nikes for Christmas.
Right.
They think, so.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And that's what I think back onto. I was one of those people where I didn't leave the country for the first time until well into my 20s. I've still only been to a couple of countries, and, my parents, they did an amazing job, but that's something that I look at friends who are well-traveled, and there's that part of me that's like, I can see the difference. I can feel the difference, So that culture, it goes such a long way. So I love that we're talking about that. Here's a question for you. This is another thing that I've been thinking a lot about because I see this on Reels sometimes. Like sometimes I get in this like weird parenting algorithm, and I'm always seeing these different parenting styles. And I'm like, wait, what's my parenting style? And I looked this up, and I've heard a few like randos, but apparently, I'm sure you already know this, but there's 3 main, I guess, acknowledged parenting styles: authoritative, authoritarian, and permissive.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what these are?
I do.
Okay. I figured, but I just wanted to make sure because I had never heard them. So my question is, working with so many kids, what and just for everybody, just to give you like what a little background on what these are. So authoritarian is very strict. It's like the because I said so type vibe, very little discussion or compromise. Authoritative is regarded as the best option because it's a balance between structure and independence. It allows for a child to grow within reasonable boundaries. Firm but nurturing is how this one is described. And then there's permissive, which is the extreme opposite of authoritarian. There's no structure, no rules that might disappoint the child, which made me LOL. And parent is more like a peer to the child. So can you tell when you get kids in a classroom, can you tell the difference? Like if somebody, and I realize like most parents don't have a sit down conversation, like we're going to be permissive. This is what we're doing. I don't know. Some people do like a more permissive style, but as a teacher, what is your experience and what's your thought here? And also as a mom.
Yeah. So you can tell. So I think I can generally tell the permissive parenting style is very obvious in children. That's the children that don't listen to anything you ask them to do. You can imagine. So that's a permissive style. I think the authoritative or authoritarian shines through a little bit, but not necessarily so much. And also most of our children are really well behaved anyway. So I think the other two, I can't really tell as much, except that I know that obviously they're following rules at home. I think about this all the time, like, what do I think my parenting style is? And I think I'm very authoritative, but also as they get older, I'm leaning more towards the permissive. Because, not that we're best friends, but I feel like when you do a lot of the work on the front end, and as they get older, you get to enjoy all that work you put in. And I think it can actually be, even in their teen years, it can be less work for you than a lot of people think that it has to be.
That makes sense. Yeah, because your girls are 18 and what?
18 and 12.
Right. Okay. So, okay, I see what you're saying. So there, yeah, I mean, your 18-year-old, she's about to flee the nest. Like you've done your job here. So you guys can, now it's like, okay, I can lean back a little bit and see that I've done my job well here. You're not gonna fly off the rails.
Absolutely. And we have a rule in our house that it's something I've really tried to instill in my children, especially as they've gotten older. And that is, honesty is always your policy. So if you screw up in life and you do something that you shouldn't do, you're better off just saying it, because eventually it's going to come out and the consequences are going to be worse than if you just acknowledge it up front. So we're really big on honesty. And I'm the same way with them. Like when I screw up or whatever, we get in a fight and I yell or whatever it is, I always apologize to them. Our other kind of motto in the house is, I'll trust you until you can't be trusted. So whereas a lot of parents look at their children and tell them, you have to prove that, even, young children, you have to prove that I can trust you. And my philosophy is that it's the opposite. You automatically trust your child until they give you reasons not to trust them. So, and that's kind of where like a lot of my parenting styles and my philosophies about children are different than most people, because I feel like when you do that authoritarian parenting or authoritative parenting on the front end, and as you're teaching them all of these beliefs and values that you have. And then as they get older, you get this opportunity to see what they've learned and to really enjoy that time with them versus, anymore, you don't have to follow your kids around, but tracking their location on your phone all night.
Yes. Yeah. It's a tough one because we're in this situation with Cruz that I don't mind sharing, but we were definitely like, oh yeah, we can trust him. Like, even at 3 and 4, he wasn't doing
Oh
anything
yeah.
crazy. He would listen when we say certain things. And he's gotten in this phase where it's like I just said to Chris the other day, like, we cannot trust him. He's a little like he's flying off the rails a little bit. We gotta ring it back in. So it's like we're definitely doing this back and forth situation. And it's hard. Being a parent is so difficult. I feel like I never, what's so crazy is like before having kids, this is insane, but I just didn't realize how difficult trying to be a good, like trying to do right by your kids is. It's really hard because all kids are so different.
It is. And my youngest, I don't think I ate in a restaurant with her until she was probably 4, because
Mm.
she would just have these huge meltdowns and screaming fits and, just this whole thing. And so I would just be like, okay, well, we have to leave because we obviously can't eat here today. Complete opposite of her sister. Complete opposite. But, like with anything, I think those early years are fun, but they're also the hardest because children are figuring out their boundaries and what can they get away with and what are the lines. And, they're learning, their brains are absorbing so much. The first 0 to 6 years, Dr. Montessori called the absorbent mind, because that's when they're really just soaking in the world. And so much of, I think what people think is mischievous behavior or malicious behavior in children, which I don't think children are malicious, but I think it's just them exploring the world and taking it all in.
Pushing their boundaries a little bit, seeing what's okay and what's not.
We do that as adults all the time.
On that kind of topic of discipline and just leading our kids in the best way possible, my next question that I have for you are like, as a teacher working with so many parents, I know this is one thing because Cruz is currently in school. And I'm always wondering, like, how is like what we do making our teachers' lives easier or more difficult? So I'm curious if there are some things that you wish parents knew that, like, hey, we really appreciate when you do this. It could be regarding like how they discipline their kids or work with their kids, or just how they operate with you. And then what are some things that parents do that makes a teacher's life more difficult?
Oh gosh. Okay. So I think when having to do with your children, I would say my number one thing is give them all the responsibility and independence that they can handle. And so the example I'll give is this: when Julia started Montessori, she was 3, and I was doing everything for her. And I was helping her get dressed. I was doing everything except wiping her butt when she went to the bathroom. And I took her to school, and they're telling me all this stuff. And I'm like, you mean she can do all this? And they were like, yeah. So I'm like, great. So then my joke is that her sister came along, and she was born, and I was like, go for it, do it all. So I think it's
Warm up her milk.
Yeah, do it all. You're on your own, kid. I think it's that giving them, independence and letting them do the things that they can do, because then when they get to school, they're much better able to function if they're not expecting the teacher to do everything for them. Same thing discipline wise, right? Like, I tell people all the time, just, have clear expectations with your children. That's what they want. They want to know what they can do, what they can't do. Just make those expectations clear. Be that parent that has boundaries. And when they cross the boundaries, then, there's some sort of consequence for it, whatever is your way of handling consequences. I think when it comes to like dealing with the people at school, my big thing is just read what they send you. Like, if they send you emails about things that are going on at school, read the email. If you have a handbook, as boring as it probably is, read the handbook, because when you're continually asking them questions all the time about things that are there that you can read yourself, I mean, that's taking away time from everything else that they could be doing in the classroom. And then, just don't have overly high, I would say don't have outrageous expectations about what their job is. Like, you can have high expectations for what they do. But they can't, like, a lot of times people think that, like, the Montessori method is something that can fix a child. Like, no child needs to be fixed. They just need some different boundaries. So, don't expect that the school is magically going to fix a problem if there's a problem. But at the same time, just be a partner with them. Like, that's my big thing. You be in the partnership, they'll be in the partnership, and then you will have, everybody's working for your child.
So helpful. So good. The email thing landed with me because I'm queen of unread, all things unread. So that's super helpful because I can imagine. I mean, I know how frustrating that is when I create like a sales page or whatever, and people are like, "How much is it?" And I'm like, "I literally have it 17 places on this one page," and you're at, so I feel you. I get it. Okay.
And that's hard though, because we're all so busy, like with our jobs and after school activities. And a lot of days, we're just, every single one of us is just trying to survive. So, I mean, so it's hard, especially if you're getting a ton of emails. Like, I send one a week. I send one email a week that's got all the highlights of what's coming up. And we use Remind a lot. We do a lot of reminders and things via Remind. But I mean, I don't want 17 emails from Julia's school sends, oh my gosh, they send so many emails. And I'm like, stop sending me all the emails. So, I mean, schools need to keep their correspondence to the important things so that parents can get through it.
Very, very true. For anybody who's listening and they have been feeling a pull to switch up maybe the school that their child goes to or the type of schooling, do you think there's a period where it's best to let the child be where they are? And of course, like, unless there's something crazy happening, like intense bullying or, like a safety issue or, behavioral issue. But like, there's more so the parent is like, I think there's something better out there. Is there a period where like, this is the best time to make that swap? This is a time where you might just want to cool it until this time. Do you have any preferences or ideas when it comes to that?
I think it always depends on the family and what the reason they're wanting to switch. So I tell people a lot, like, your child is most likely going to be successful wherever you put them. I say most likely because it's not all, because there are instances where it's the institution's problem, not the family's problem. If you believe in why you have them there and what they're doing. So like, we've had children come in 6th grade that have been, and that's late for joining a Montessori school, that have done phenomenally because their parents found us and knew that was where they needed their child to be. We've had children come at the age of 4 that have had a terrible time because their parents didn't believe in the reasons that they had them there. So I think that's what it comes down to is, why is it you want to move them, and what is it that you want, that you're hoping that you're going to find in this next school? If you're moving them because you don't like their teacher, well, teachers change. If you're moving them, for a number of other reasons that have less to do with their education itself and more to do with other things, like, I think that's where you really have to stop and assess, like, what is it I really am hoping to gain?
Very helpful. Okay. Good to know. So there's not like an age, like, okay, if they're in middle school, keep them put. It's just understand again, it goes back to the values. Like, why are you doing this? And
it really does. I mean, it's really all about what is it? It goes back to that whole idea of what is it that you want for your child? What is it that you want for their education, and who do you want them to be?
As far as like with your experience, what do you see Or what do you maybe hope to see for the future of our education system?
Well, what I would hope to see would be, personally, would be a complete overhaul of it. You
Mm.
know, in Arkansas right now, we have this very controversial legislation that's going on, that basically, well, for the last year or so, there's been a big conversation around teacher salaries because Arkansas is, like everything else in the state, we're at the bottom of the list in the salaries that our teachers make. So there's been a lot of conversation around teacher pay, which is a very valid conversation to be having. But there's this legislation that's out now, that's going to increase base teacher pay along with some other things, but there's also a lot in it that's not necessarily going to be great for the school districts. So without going into all of it, it's basically good. It'll become a voucher system. Well, what I wish they would do instead of, because I feel like every 2 or 3 years across the country, you know, we're having these conversations about testing scores and, you know, academics and where we fall and how children are struggling. In Arkansas, only 35% of third graders read at a third grade reading level. Like, I mean, the numbers are really sad. But in every 2 or 3 years, it feels like all we're doing is we're taking a box of Band-Aids and we're sticking it on the leaks in the dam, hoping that the Band-Aids are going to hold back the water, and they don't. And I would love to see someone, whether it's statewide, nationally, whatever it is, really drill down on what is the best way for children to learn. Like when I was doing my Montessori training, there were a lot of administrators from South Carolina there because the South Carolina legislature, and this was like 8 or 9 years ago, the South Carolina legislature had decided to convert a lot of their public schools to Montessori schools. And so they were sending all the principals to be trained. And so I would love if there was a movement to actually look at what science says about children's learning and what science says about testing and everything else. And if we could actually model an education system based on that versus continually trying to like patch all these holes that aren't really working.
Yeah, you had mentioned, so we were DMing prior to this conversation. You had mentioned the Learns education bill. So I looked into that. And at first, from my perspective, I think this is part of the issue that a lot of people are bringing up is like from first glance, I'm reading it as not as an educator, just as a person. And it seemed incredible. It's
Right.
like all of the things that it outlined, it was like, you know, people can transfer their kids unlimited and even to private schools and increase of teachers' pay and bonuses based on performance and expanded maternity leave, mental health awareness training, so many things. But I guess that's what a lot of people are arguing is like, yeah, it sounds incredible, but this bill is 144 pages and they're trying to pass it like something like 2 days or something
Yeah.
insane. And from your perspective, you're like, okay, it almost seems like they're trying to maybe make the environment better for the kids, like thinking more of the teacher's perspective. At least that's what it seemed for me. Then it would like pour into the kids. But your argument is one, that's not sustainable because you're in the education system. And two, it's still not addressing the way that we're educating our children. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. And Arkansas is a very rural state.
Mm-hmm.
So, we've got school districts that, you know, are graduating like a senior high class with 15 children in them. Very
Mm.
small, very rural. Schools are very far apart. And so you look at this bill and you think, oh, this is really great. But then you don't think about, and I'll be the first person to tell you, I think a lot of our school districts are like bloated administration wise. They've got too many administrators. And there's a lot that they could do with their budgets too. I mean, I'm not in the public education system, but I firmly believe that. But you look at this and you have a small school district, let's say that has 200 children. And even if there is a private school for those children to go to, you're talking about a substantial amount of funding that's going to come out of that school district that's not going to leave money then for paying teacher salaries for the rest of the kids that are still there. Same thing with the teacher salaries. They're not going to increase funding to these smaller school districts. So you're automatically raising these teacher salaries without giving the school districts any supplement to them. And there's really just a number of things. Whereas in my opinion, if they would look at, okay, what can we do to raise the reading rate? Keeping a third grader in third grade because they can't read doesn't do anything for that third grader, because they're most likely not going to be able to read after another year in third grade. So instead of saying, how can we change our systems and our strategies, they're just, putting out this bill that looks, great on the front. But when you really drill down into it, it's going to cause huge problems across the state.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So it's just like, like you mentioned earlier, just a lot of holes. Like, okay, how this sounds really pretty and cute, but how do we actually make this work with actual funding?
Correct. How do we actually fix what's wrong in our schools?
Right. And it should always go back to the kids. Like, how do we, let's start with the kids. Let's start there. And I see what you're saying about budgeting and yeah, like thinking about and I realize I don't live in Arkansas. Nobody else lives, not a lot of people, not everybody who listens to this lives in Arkansas, but this could happen in our state too. And it's just something to be aware of, because like I said, you sent me 2 articles, which I love that you did this, because one was like the bright and shiny, like, here are all the good things that's happening. It was super biased. And the other one was like, okay, but also how do we actually make, like, have you considered what, the fallout from this, which I wouldn't have previously thought about. So okay.
And when I talk about, like, I say this a lot, when I talk about how schools are designed, I often am just thinking even a lot about movement, because like science says that the more children move or the more adults move, the better they learn. And so like you and I are sitting here and we're shifting in our seats and we're moving because we've been sitting still for a while and now we're both kind of antsy. So you think about kids sitting still for 8 hours a day, like it does nothing for their learning. But it's easier for the adult, because if you say to the children, everybody has to sit still, right? It's easier for the adult than if you have a bunch of kids up, even if they're constructively moving around. There's a lot more, that you have to pay attention to. And so just even things like adding movement into the classroom, to everything from that to making things more multisensory, all of those are things that cement learning better in the brain. But they're harder for the adults to handle. And so a lot of times that's not what schools want to deal with or handle or do. It's not designed for that.
Right. So hopefully just over time, people will notice this shift in what's best for the kids. Yeah. I mean, I can't sit still for 30 minutes, especially nowadays with technology being what it is. And, I'm 35 years old. Like, I'm not a freaking toddler or young child who has all of this energy bubbling up, just wanting to live their best life and have a good time. And yeah, there's a time and place to sit down and listen. But for 8 hours straight, that would be hard for anybody to do, let alone a kid. And that's just one area.
And they can't talk. In a lot of lunchrooms, children can't talk. They have to eat their lunch quietly. Yeah, like it's just not conducive to having a successful day.
Well, hopefully in our lifetime, we will see some really positive shifts in the education system. And I just appreciate so much your dedication to this, not only for your girls, but the kids that you teach. And you've been in this space for such a long time. And then now taking it outside of the school to support educators and parents alike who just simply, at the end of the day, we just want what's best for our kids. We want them to grow up to be intelligent, decent contributors to society. And I feel like the more that I've gotten to know you and hear your thoughts and your plans and expertise around education, that's your goal as well. So I just appreciate so much you coming here and bringing these thoughts and making yourself available to parents and educators who just want to be better all around as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, anyone that's listening is welcome to, reach out to me with questions or start a conversation or anything, even if it's just, hey, I have this going on, what's your opinion or whatever. I'm happy to help.
Yeah, definitely go find Jessica, which I'll have you share your information in just a second because you make really good content. One, around the books that you're reading. You're in a book club and you talk all of the time about books that you're into. So if you're a reader, Jess talks a lot about that, but also sharing really helpful tips. I was perusing your Instagram earlier, just as a parent, with a young child who's switching it up on me. It's like, okay, let me find a little nugget here. So I feel like I'm failing. So where can people find you?
So on Instagram at Modern School Marm. I'm the one with the pink hair and the leather jacket.
Yep, she's a badass. Jessica, thank you so much for hanging with me today and sharing this.
Thanks,
And y'all, if
Allie.
you have, oh, and I'll get that list of questions for our kids. I'll post that in the show notes because that's fascinating. I'm going to be looking at that myself. And yeah, you guys reach out, say hey to Jessica, and thank you again for your time.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.